makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Kathy, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the June 28th issue of the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Trump rants divide court on race bias. Justices spar over his slurs about Haitians, by Adam Liptak. The Supreme Court on Thursday confronted two questions that have also confounded many Americans for the past decade. How seriously should people take President Trump's wild, coarse, and ugly statements? And are some of them marred by racial animus? Like the country itself, the court was deeply divided in both. In ruling that President Trump could deport some 350,000 Haitians, the Supreme Court's conservative majority first had to determine whether race had played a role in his decision to remove the humanitarian protections that had shielded them. If discrimination was a motivating factor in Mr. Trump's determination, the leading precedent said it would violate the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause. Writing for the majority, Justice Samuel A. Alito, Jr. concluded that Mr. Trump's many statements about Haitians were not overtly racial, and that it was unlikely that race had been a motivating factor in the administration's decision to end the protections. He was joined by the court's 5 other Republican appointees. What Justice Alito did not do was set out a single example of those statements. In dissent, Justice Elena Kagan was incredulous. The statements fairly shout, she wrote, in their racial undertones and overtones alike, that race entered into the president's resolve to remove Haitians from this country. The clash was a vivid example of what critics say has been the court's tendency to give Mr. Trump the benefit of the doubt, interpreting even his most extreme remarks charitably. The case concerned the Temporary Protected Status Program, which was created by Congress in 1990 to allow people whose home countries are deemed unsafe because of war, natural disasters, or other crises to live and work in the United States. Mr. Trump has long questioned the program. Thursday's decision concerned people from Haiti and Syria, though only the Haitian plaintiffs challenged the termination of their status on equal protection grounds. Other aspects of the decision will most likely allow the administration to withdraw protections from even more immigrants. The most telling aspect of Justice Alito's majority opinion, Justice Kagan said, was that he could not bring himself to quote a single example of Trump's statements about Haiti and Haitians. Mr. Trump's remarks were so repellent and racially inflected that the majority declines to put them in print, she wrote. She filled the gap by setting down a litany of statements by Mr. Trump about Haiti and its people. Her list included these comments from Mr. Trump. Haitians in Ohio were eating the pets of their neighbors. Haitians probably have AIDS. Haiti is a shithole country, which is filthy, dirty, disgusting. Haitian immigration is like a death wish for our country. Haitians are poisoning the blood of our nation. Justice Kagan said those comments were more than sufficient evidence of racial animus. The references of filth, disease, and primitiveness are shot through with racial stereotypes and tropes, she wrote. Mr. Trump, she added, seemed to have no problem with some immigration. Why can't we have some people from Norway, Sweden, he once asked. Haitians are black, wrote Justice Kagan, who was joined by Justices Sonia Sotomayor and Ketanji Brown Jackson. Norwegians and Swedes, not so much. The court's conservative majority has a history of interpreting Mr. Trump's remarks generously. In 2018, in upholding his ban on travel from several predominantly Muslim countries, Chief Justice John G. Roberts, Jr. recounted Mr. Trump's call for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. But the Chief Justice said Mr. Trump's comments had to be balanced against the powers of the president to conduct the national security affairs of the nation. The issue before us is not whether to denounce the statements, Chief Justice Roberts wrote. It is instead the significance of those statements in reviewing a presidential directive, neutral on its face, addressing a matter within the core of executive responsibility. In Thursday's opinion, too, Justice Alito said there were neutral reasons for lifting the temporary protected status protections for Haitians. One may oppose TPS and favor tighter restrictions on immigration for economic or other reasons that have nothing to do with race, he wrote. And a person without racial bias can provide a harshly unfavorable description of living conditions in some of the countries with TPS designations. He allowed that political discourse by prominent public figures is increasingly couched in terms that would have scandalized the public just a short time ago. But he concluded that the administration opposed immigration generally and had not used racial criteria in its decisions. Justice Alito wrote that the temporary protections had been lifted in more than a dozen countries, including Nepal, Burma, Afghanistan, Yemen, Syria, Somalia, Ethiopia, South Sudan, Cameroon, Nicaragua, Honduras, and Venezuela. Most would regard this as a racially diverse group of countries, he wrote. The plaintiffs contended that they were all non-white. When the case was argued in April, Justice Alito suggested that non-white was not a meaningful category. Do you think that if you put Syrians, Turks, Greeks, and other people who live around the Mediterranean in a lineup, do you think you could say those people, that all of them, are they all non-white? He asked. After an extended back and forth with a lawyer for the Haitian plaintiffs, Justice Alito said, "I don't like dividing the people of the world into these groups." In his opinion on Thursday, the justice wrote that only the termination of a TPS designation for a Nordic or Germanic country would satisfy critics who said that Mr. Trump's determinations were tainted by race discrimination. For his part, Justice Alito depicted Haiti's plight in sympathetic terms at odds with Mr. Trump's rhetoric. It is a very poor country, and living conditions there are unquestionably difficult, he wrote, adding, "But poverty and deprivation are no reflection on character, and there is no justification for denigrating the character of Haitians who suffer from and bear no responsibility for their country's ills." He went on to describe the many positive contributions Haitians had made to the United States from the very beginning, and they continue to do so today. Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who adopted 2 children born in Haiti, signed Justice Alito's majority opinion, along with Chief Justice Roberts and Justices Clarence Thomas, Neil M. Gorsuch, and Brett M. Kavanaugh. Israelis watch ties with U.S. coming loose, by David M. Halbfinger. Jerusalem. For weeks, the Israeli news media has been obsessing about the once ironclad U.S.-Israeli relationship. President Trump's pursuit of a peace deal with Iran, which many Israelis see as a betrayal, and his repeated berating of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu have raised doubts about whether they can still call Mr. Trump the best friend in the White House that Israel has ever had. Then came Tuesday's election results in New York City. 3 pro-Palestinian candidates backed by Mayor Zohran Mamdani, a harsh critic of Israel, defeated moderates in hotly contested Democratic congressional primaries. No one in Israel is suggesting a pivot to China or Russia quite yet. But those who have studied or steered the U.S.-Israel relationship say that the strains and tensions are fast becoming worrisome for Israel. "I am extremely concerned," said Asaf Zamir, a deputy mayor of Tel Aviv, who was Israel's general counsel in New York from 2021 to 2023. 3 candidates had made fierce criticism of Israel centered to their campaigns and political identities. And they say it out loud in the most Jewish city in the world after Jerusalem. Experts on the relationship warn that Israel may not be able to count on solid support from Washington for much longer, whether in concrete assistance like billions of dollars in yearly military aid, in symbolic backing like reliable vetoes of anti-Israel resolutions at the United Nations, or even in tax exemptions for U.S. charities benefiting Israeli causes. There's a cliff, and we're heading towards it, said Daniel C. Kurtzer, a Princeton professor who was ambassador to Israel under President George W. Bush. Some pro-Israel moderates also won House primaries in New York on Tuesday. But the victories by the candidates Mr. Mamdani aided, Brad Lander and Claire Valdez, who accuse Israel of genocide in Gaza, and Darialitza Avila Chevalier, who has questioned Israel's right to exist, and, like Ms. Valdez, calls it an apartheid state, landed like bold new dots on a scatter chart, revealing a clear trend of rising American hostility to Israel. Mr. Zamir, the Tel Aviv deputy mayor, said, "I'm waking up and hearing that we're genocidal and apartheid. I'm a left-wing, two-state, pro-peace Israeli, but I am not blind or crazy," he added. "I know what the situation in Israel is, and we're not those things we're being called. And yet more and more Americans are buying into and voting on those grounds. That troubles me." Israel was already hemorrhaging popularity in the United States and in both parties, largely over its prosecution of the 2-year war in Gaza after the Hamas-led October 7, 2023 attacks, in which about 1,200 people were killed and some 250 taken hostage. Tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians were killed in the ensuing war. Food shortages caused widespread famine, and the enclave has been largely destroyed by Israel's campaign. American sympathy for the Palestinians exceeded their sympathy for Israel for the first time in a New York Times Siena poll in September. And 60% of Americans said that they held unfavorable opinions of Israel in a Pew survey in April, up from 42% in 2022. If I were the Israelis, I wouldn't necessarily be concerned with 3 or 4 members of Congress who are way out to the left, Michael Koplow, an analyst at the Israel Policy Forum, a New York-based research group, said of Tuesday's primary results. But, he said, those new lawmakers signaled a broader Democratic turn against Israel. Opposition to Israel is now the major foreign policy issue, he noted. It's not on the fringe anymore. It's not even relegated to the sidelines in terms of its importance. It's front and center in campaigns and in worldviews. It could well be front and center again in the 2028 presidential primaries, and Israelis watching American politics say they can imagine the eventual nominees of both parties agreeing on little except that U.S. policy toward Israel needs to change. For Democratic critics of Israel, the rift is focused on the perception that the two countries no longer share the same values, chiefly when it comes to human rights and Israel's treatment of the Palestinians. The specialness of this relationship was pleasant and easygoing and taken for granted for decades, said Dalia Scheindlin, an Israeli pollster who grew up in New York. That was until Israel's war with Hamas, she added, when many Democrats and a growing number of Republicans realized that a special relationship was all well and good as long as Israel wasn't killing thousands of babies in Gaza. People just broke over that. Israel's claim to being the only democracy in the Middle East has been tarnished in American eyes both by its oppressive treatment of the Palestinians and by its right-wing government's efforts to overhaul Israeli institutions and consolidate its power. That claim is also arguably less important to the United States at a time when the Trump administration is emphasizing the exertion of raw power and geopolitical transactionalism over America's traditional self-image as the leader of the free world. For Republican critics, many of whom accuse Israel of dragging the United States into fighting its wars, most recently in Iran, the argument centers on how much American and Israeli national interests really still overlap. After 40 years of Israel calling itself a strategic asset to the U.S., there's a legitimate question. Is Israel an asset, or is it becoming a liability? Said Elan Pincus, who was Israel's general counsel in New York in the early 2000s. The more American voters feel they are paying for the Iran war in higher prices at the gas pump, he said, the more their elected officials will wonder, what does America get from this relationship with Israel? You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Even so, the United States has a long way to go before support of Israel could fairly be called into question. The Trump administration has accelerated billions in arms sales and emergency military aid to Israel, backed Israel in peace talks with Hamas, eased some pressure on West Bank settlement expansion, and taken a host of actions to curb anti-Israel protests on American college campuses. Should the alliance fray further, however, there is a lot that Israel could lose. Already, because of the talks with Iran, the Trump administration is trying to constrain Israeli actions against its enemies in the region, most noticeably in Lebanon, in ways that Israelis say they never anticipated. Israelis can also no longer count on receiving billions of dollars a year in U.S. military aid, something that Mr. Netanyahu effectively acknowledged this year when he proposed that Israel gradually wean itself from that assistance. Other measures that an increasingly frosty Congress, White House, or both could take to express displeasure with Israel include stripping charities supporting West Bank settlement of federal tax-exempt status. Ms. Valdez, one of the House primary winners in New York, had tried to do that at the state level in Albany. These are all things that Israel has assumed would never come from the U.S., Mr. Koplow, the analyst, said. Experts say it is easy now to imagine, even in this administration, publicly lashing out at Israel, such as by withholding its veto from UN Security Council resolutions critical of Israel, a step it has taken only rarely over the years. Mr. Kurtzer, the former U.S. ambassador, suggested that Mr. Trump might use a withheld veto to try to punish Israel if he is blamed for Republican losses in the midterm elections. Right now, even today in this environment, a U.S. veto is almost automatic, but who knows, Mr. Kurtzer said. You have a mercurial president who judges everything not on the basis of our relationship with Israel, but on the basis of what it does for him. The strained relationship is starting to enter the Israeli political conversation in the prelude to elections this fall. Naftali Bennett, who toppled Mr. Netanyahu in 2021 and is trying to repeat that feat, said last week that the U.S.-Israeli alliance was at an all-time low and that repairing it would be a huge undertaking. For the first time since the establishment of Israel, he said, Israel is a net negative in the United States. That's a disaster, he added. Other candidates have suggested that Israel should crack down on settler violence against Palestinians or give diplomacy a chance rather than trying to solve every problem militarily. For now, as Israelis watch their support in the United States continue to bleed, there is little to do but wait. Mr. Zamir said the worst part was psychological. I don't fear the loss of military aid, he said. We can live without it. I fear the loss of backing toward the rest of the world, the feeling that you have our back. Heat Wave in Europe Testing Climate Action by Michael D. Shear and Jenna Smilek. London. It was a crisp 54 degrees in Aberdeen on the northeast coast of Scotland last week when Kemi Badenoch, the leader of Britain's Conservative Party, once again championed the country's fossil fuel industry. The war on oil and gas must end, she insisted, prompting applause from supporters in the port city, a major hub for petroleum extraction in the North Sea. We need to get Britain drilling again. 8 days later, thermostats across southern England and Wales recorded soaring heat, with temperatures in London nearing 100 degrees. Schools closed, trains were canceled or delayed, and some hospitals halted elective procedures. The opening session of London Climate Action Week, focused on improving extreme heat governance, was called off after Britain's National Weather Service, the Met Office, issued a red warning. For politicians like Ms. Badenoch, who has called herself a net zero skeptic and whose party won a special election in Aberdeen, the increasingly intense heat presents a challenge. How do they reconcile their support for faster extraction and use of polluting energy sources that contribute to the warming of the planet with the reality of a planet that already feels like it's burning up? Andrew Bowie, the lawmaker who oversees energy policy for the Conservatives, said in response to a request for comment that Ms. Badenoch and the Conservatives supported the transition to cleaner energy, but added, "It's a transition, and it makes no sense at all to pursue net zero targets while inflicting higher energy bills on households, deindustrializing, and losing the potential tax revenue from exploiting our North Sea oil and gas resources." An anticipated spike in heat-related mortality in Europe is already apparent. 5 people have died from the heat in Italy, according to the country's main news agency, including several who were working outside and a homeless man. In France, at least 40 people have drowned, many of them teenagers swimming in unsupervised areas. London's ambulance services said that it had responded to its highest ever number of life-threatening emergencies on Wednesday. Everyone agrees something must be done, but not everyone agrees on what that should be. Increasingly, the answer from right-wing politicians is to focus on a short-term fix that almost everyone agrees is necessary: the installation of air conditioning units in European homes, schools, public buildings, and hospitals. During intense heat waves, calling for improvement of the sometimes crumbling infrastructure of aging European cities can be an effective way of drawing attention to that problem without saying much about the longer-term underlying cause: rising greenhouse gas emissions. In France, far-right politicians who have advocated cutting net zero initiatives hope to gain from the heat wave, using it to accuse the government of failing to make the country more resilient, but also as a cultural issue against the hard left, which has often opposed the use of air conditioning on environmental grounds. If I am elected president, I will put into place a massive air conditioning plan, Marine Le Pen, the leader of the National Rally Party, pledged on Friday, starting in places with the most vulnerable populations. Ms. Le Pen argues that air conditioning units do not exacerbate global warming, saying that when environmentalists don't want something, they twist the studies, they pull things out of context. New air conditioning units have become greener in recent years, but they still contribute to climate change by guzzling electricity, which, if it doesn't come from renewable sources, contributes to the emissions that warm the planet. These units also pump hot air outside buildings as they push cold air inside, adding to the already hot weather. And they put enormous strain on Europe's aging electrical grid, especially when they are running full blast to ward off extreme heat. In the context of Northern Europe's traditionally mild, temperate climate, some left-wing and Green parties opposed air conditioning and have instead favored renovating buildings with architectural fixes to keep them cool when it gets hot. But the dangers to health posed by this week's heat wave are piling pressure on that view and changing minds. In the Belgian city of Ghent, which is run mostly by left-of-center politicians, the municipal website this week discouraged citizens from using air conditioners, saying that the best air conditioner is a tree, and advising they use fans and request a free tree to plant outside their houses. Maurice van der Reyde, a right-wing member of the Flemish Parliament, responded to Ghent's recommendations on social media. "It is absurd that all governments in our country, under pressure from left-green mumbo-jumbo, advise against the use of air conditioning," he wrote on Tuesday. "The most efficient and best solution. How many deaths would the government already have on its conscience with this kind of absurd advice?" After the New York Times sent a request for comment, Ghent removed wording that read, "Avoid air conditioners," replacing it with the phrase, "Cool smartly." Thomas Dierkens, a spokesman for the mayor of Ghent, said in a written comment that the city was not against air conditioning, noting that it had installed 30 portable air conditioners into daycare centers this week. "Health always comes first in a heat wave," he said. Marine Tondelier, the head of the Green Party in France, acknowledged that she was breaking a taboo when she said on Tuesday that there are places where we can no longer do without air conditioning. In London, Sadiq Khan, the centre-left Labour Party mayor, said on Thursday that air conditioning would need to be installed in the capital's schools, offices, and hospitals, as he warned that London needed to act now to strengthen its resilience ahead of worse heat waves to come. And at the European level, Terry Reintke, co-president of the European Parliament's Green Group, said in an interview that some air conditioning was necessary, alongside longer-term solutions like planting more green spaces. Unlike in the United States, where climate change politics have become more divided during Mr. Trump's terms, there is still broad support in Britain and Europe for taking action to tackle global warming. In a survey last year by Eurobarometer, the European Union's public opinion service, about 85% of respondents said that they consider climate change a serious problem for the world and action against climate change a public health priority. A survey in the United States last year showed a much smaller proportion of people who even believed that climate change was happening. A wide body of research on European voters has found that extreme weather events linked to climate change can influence politics, but that such events do not guarantee a backlash to climate skeptic parties. A 2025 study by Jessica Hack, a political scientist at the University of Hamburg, found that abnormally high temperatures in Germany had delivered a small but meaningful increase in support for the Green Party, suggesting a link between extreme heat and support for climate action. A similar study in 2022 by the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research found voters in areas affected by heat waves, droughts, and other environmental events were more likely to support European politicians who backed climate action, but with an important catch. The authors found that support only increased when the economy was strong. In the aftermath of the global financial crisis of 2007-2008, for example, the authors wrote in the study, a substantial reduction in environmental concerns was observable across all European regions. Europe's far-right parties have tried to tap into economic concerns and focus attention on burdensome regulations. Governments are scrambling to respond to extreme weather, from floods to heat, meaning this can be fertile ground for voter frustration. Last month, Nicola Procaccini, the co-chairman of the right-leaning European Conservatives and Reformists group in the European Parliament, said that instead of focusing on adaptation to climate change, investing resources in the protection of territories and people, the choice was made to sacrifice the growth of the European economy and support for people, especially the most vulnerable, on the altar of climate mitigation. In fact, scientists say that both adaptation and mitigation are urgently required. Heat waves are becoming more frequent, longer, and hotter with climate change, as a direct result of the fossil fuels we are releasing as a society, Professor Haley Fowler of Newcastle University said in an emailed comment. Our current climate is the least extreme we will live in our lifetimes, and certainly until we reach net zero, and we need to adapt urgently. In London this week, environmentalists were hoping that the intense weather would underscore their arguments. There is irony in the fact that a London Climate Action Week event had to be canceled due to extreme heat in a temperate, wealthy country, said Chris Anderson, head of Climate Risk and Resilience at Practical Action, an environmental group. We're fully in favor of the decision for the well-being of attendees and panelists, he said, but it shows that extreme weather is becoming unpredictable and moving faster than people can adapt, even in the richest countries. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Thousands of migrants are fleeing South Africa. A race amid threats to leave by Tuesday. By John Ellegon, Durban, South Africa. A street corner in the South African coastal city of Durban has become a bustling scene of desperation. Thousands of migrants crowd around colorful plastic sacks, boxes, and trash bags, carrying what belongings they could salvage before fleeing the country. Women tuck their babies under blankets. Vendors hawk solar-powered cell phone chargers and powered cell phone chargers and potato chips. Portable toilets, large green water tanks, and makeshift showers fashioned from gray tarps are the only sanitation available. The people in this encampment, like the handful that have popped up around the country, had been stuck out here for days, sometimes weeks, after anti-immigration activists called on undocumented foreigners to leave South Africa by Tuesday or face untold consequences. The activists have not explained what they plan to do to the immigrants who stay after the deadline, but even the threat has led thousands of immigrants, mostly from other African nations, to leave South Africa. Some immigrants have turned to consulates for help in leaving the country, overwhelming foreign missions and South African immigration authorities racing to process paperwork for families, many of them undocumented. Mobs have already attacked many immigrant homes and businesses. Fearing for their safety as the deadline approaches, thousands of migrants waiting to leave South Africa have resorted to sleeping outside government offices, foreign missions, or here in Durban, an old park just a block from a picturesque beach on the Indian Ocean. It's a humanitarian disaster in the making, and the state authorities seem to be asleep at the wheel, said Dal McKinley, an immigrant rights activist in South Africa. It's outrageous. The government has said the unfolding crisis has been the result of years of migrants taking advantage of the country's immigration policies. South Africa is the continent's wealthiest nation. When people come to South Africa as refugees, the government does not put them in refugee camps, but instead allows them to integrate into society. But many immigrants manipulate the refugee system to stay in the country longer, said Jabulo Nutsa, the Deputy Home Affairs Minister, while others who come for economic opportunities often overstay their visa. Since 2008, South Africa has battled waves of deadly xenophobic violence, with immigrants often being blamed for the country's high unemployment and high crime. But the country has never seen such large, spontaneous migrant camps cropping up on the street, Mr. Nzuza said. The largest camp started several weeks ago when thousands of Malawians began sleeping at a park in a residential community in suburban Durban while waiting for their government to repatriate them. The police at one point clashed with the migrants and fired tear gas. About a week ago, those Malawians were moved into an old fairground. Large white tents have been set up on a massive paved lot surrounded by a barbed wire fence. Inside, aid organizations are providing food and medical care. But the demand has been so high that thousands of Malawians have been forced to wait outside before they are let in to be processed and put on buses to return to Malawi. The government said that at least 8,000 people were at the camp and that at least 7,000 Malawians had already been sent back. On Thursday afternoon, Charles Paul, from Malawi, reached between an opening in the fence to caress his 2-month-old son, Kwanya, who was strapped to the chest of his girlfriend, Sanliswe Xili. It was almost time to say goodbye. After 7 years in South Africa, Mr. Paul, 24, had decided to return to Malawi because of the threats against foreigners. Ms. Nxili, 23, is South African, so she is staying behind with their child. She too is nervous about what comes next. The family survived on Mr. Paul's monthly salary of about $365 as a carpenter. Ms. Nxili said she would have to send her son to live with her mother so that she could find a job. They must not chase them all away, Ms. Nxili said, of the anti-immigrant activists threatening migrants in South Africa. They must document them. Even those who are in the country legally say they are not being spared. At another camp in Durban, hundreds of refugees have been cramped on a sidewalk in front of a Home Affairs office. Most of the refugees say they were attacked by South Africans who told them to leave the country, even though they are here legally as refugees. Government officials have told those in the camp that they must return to their communities or will be taken to an immigration detention center. The refugees have refused, arguing that neither option is safe. On a recent evening, Children bounced on foam mattresses on the sidewalk next to a convenience store as their mothers sat by wrapped in blankets. Cars sped past on the busy road as 37-year-old Valerie Ngabo pondered the unthinkable, returning to her war-torn village in the Democratic Republic of Congo. She has been in South Africa since 2008, and during a previous wave of xenophobic violence in 2015, the mother of four was forced to spend 6 months sleeping outside, she said. More recently, she said, South Africans have attacked the hair salon she owns, beat her and her colleagues, and told them to leave. Life might be better in Congo, she said. There's no hope, said Ms. Ngabo, adding that she had been approved for resettlement in the United States in 2024, but has been unable to go after President Trump froze the refugee program when he took office last year. There's nowhere I can go, she said. Gladys Irakotse, 26, was born in South Africa to refugee parents from Burundi. She always thought she could blend in among South Africans, but that no longer seems possible, she said. Things have gotten so hostile toward immigrants that even her 10-year-old son has been threatened by his classmates. Ms. Irakotse, also staying in the camp, said she did not recognize her country anymore. I didn't expect this to actually happen in South Africa, she said. At Freedom Con, Male Bonding and Right-Wing Christian Activism by Ruth Graham, George Washington. At Freedom Con, there were feats of strength and CrossFit contests. There was an obstacle course and a station for practicing how to change a tire. There was prayer and music, an original verse from a pastor and a tactical gear salesman known as the Warrior Poet. There were exhortations from the stage to run for office, to have more babies, and to reject woke, secular, gay paganism. Heterosexual, sober men who marry girls and read Bibles were the new punk rock, the pastor Mark Driscoll said in a fiery sermon that brought attendees to their feet. More than 4,500 men gathered in central Washington over Father's Day weekend for a testosterone-fueled celebration of Christianity and patriotism that culminated in a statement calling conservative Christian men to rise as statesmen. Men came with their sons. They came with their pastors. They came with their brothers, their hunting buddies, their Bible study friends. The two-day event took place just outside the small town of George, Washington, against the backdrop of America's 250th anniversary. The amalgam of political activation, Christian worship, and male bonding provided a glimpse of an emerging right-wing movement with masculinity as its unifying force. Rick Slaughter, 44, camped overnight at the festival on June 19th with a group of 8 men and boys from around Orting, Washington. On the following afternoon, they smiled for a photo on the sloping lawn overlooking the Columbia River with the state flag of Washington and another one reading, "Jesus is King." The men meet weekly in a group affiliated with Promise Keepers, an evangelical men's ministry that boomed in the 1990s and has recently been resurrected with a sharper political edge. The trip was an opportunity for them to spend more time together and hear from political candidates and well-known pastors about their responsibilities as Christian men as they saw it. What we're trying to do is be better men, Mr. Slaughter said. Many of the members have become sober and started marriage counseling since joining the group. Mr. Slaughter has gotten a handle on an anger problem, he said. Federal prosecutors accused Mr. Slaughter of attacking Capitol Police officers in the riot on January 6, 2021, but the case was dismissed last year when President Trump granted sweeping clemency to participants. Mr. Slaughter described the charges in an interview as a lot of lies. Mr. Driscoll, who resigned under pressure more than a decade ago from the large church he founded in Seattle, has made a roaring comeback as the evangelical mainstream has embraced his style of brash provocations in the Trump era. Accused of bullying and cultivating a culture of fear at his church in Seattle, he now leads a large congregation in Scottsdale, Arizona, and has a huge online following. His sermon on June 19th swept through the books of Genesis and Exodus, drawing connections between ancient biblical stories and contemporary American politics. He described the Tower of Babel as an illustration of the perils of globalism and an entity faced by Moses as the transgender god of Egypt. New days, old demons, he said. You men need to understand if you're not angry, you're not paying attention. Many of the pastors on the program's lineup were leaders of a growing cohort of politically aggressive churches closely allied with the Trump administration and its priorities. Some were there to promote new political and educational institutions that indicated their ambitions to extend their influence beyond the purely spiritual. Grace City Church, a large congregation in nearby Wenatchee, Washington, spearheaded the event under the auspices of Stronger Man Nation, a men's ministry. Both were founded by Josh McPherson, a pastor who has been invited to pray for Mr. Trump in the White House, and whose empire now includes a popular podcast and a new anti-woke college he envisions as a Protestant West Point. Issues mentioned from the main stage included social conservative mainstays like abortion and gender identity, but also housing prices and construction costs, in a state where both significantly outpaced the national average. Even young men like me, who want to be providers, who want to start a family, who want to say no to vice and live a righteous life, are crushed by the weight of tyranny, David Prince, a student at Grace City's new college, said from the stage during a presentation with other Gen Z men. Another recurring theme was how important it was for conservative men to stay in blue states rather than decamping to friendlier jurisdictions like Texas. What a weekend like this represents is an infusion of hope into good men who have been sidelined by virtue of feeling like this is a David versus Goliath here in Washington, Russell Johnson, 40, the pastor of a growing network of churches in Washington, said in an interview. If all the good guys leave, the state doesn't get better, it gets worse. It was up to pastors like him to encourage them, he said. What in the hell is the point of having influence if you don't use it for stuff that matters? In a hypnotically energetic sermon, Mr. Johnson exhorted men in the state to stay put. This place is worth fighting for, Mr. Johnson said from the stage. It doesn't matter how far you've gone or how many mistakes you've made or how upside down this region appears to be. When God starts speaking, things start shifting, darkness begins trembling, and God's people start advancing. Nate Schatzline, a pastor and Republican state representative in Fort Worth, told attendees at a panel that many of his church's small groups, a format that traditionally includes Bible study and socializing, organize outings to speak at local city council meetings. Another pastor on the panel reminded the group that churches in Washington can collect ballots for their congregants, a strategy once viewed skeptically by Republicans but is now embraced. Mr. Schatzline, 34, also runs an organization that mobilizes churches to support local conservative candidates and train others to run for office. The group has chapters in 4 states, including Texas and Washington, but plans to expand to 28 states by the end of the year. The church he works for, Mercy Culture, has endorsed candidates and recently opened an outpost in Washington, D.C. The GOP is not perfect, and we need reformation, but let's, as the church, stop complaining about the GOP when we refuse to be engaged with the GOP, he said at the panel. We consider the GOP a partner in this fight. Afterward, dozens of men crowded up to the stage to speak with him. Adam James, a pastor at Grace City Church, called Mr. Schatzline a rising star and compared him admiringly to Charlie Kirk in an interview. Mr. James, who is running for a state house seat in central Washington, offered some of the event's most direct policy prescriptions from the main stage. He encouraged the crowd to support conservative candidates for 5 open Supreme Court seats in the state and promoted Bible-believing candidates for several legislative seats, including the one he hopes to take over from a Republican legislator he described in an interview as an establishment figure. He also announced that a push to eliminate the state's new income tax had just reached enough signatures to be added to the ballot in November and urged the men to vote for it. The takeaway for some attendees was to start paying attention to down-ballot races and midterm elections. Everyone shows up to vote for president, but no one shows up to vote for dog catcher, said Kenny Blight, 38, who who was part of Mr. Slaughter's Promise Keepers group, "I want a biblical dog catcher." Almost the only women on the grounds, other than venue employees and one journalist, were hundreds of volunteers from Grace City Church who each paid $55 to be there. General admission for men was $199. "God created men for a purpose. They're providers and protectors," said Marcy Lyon, 55, who was volunteering with her teenage daughter. "When they get together and bond, it helps them stand up." A small pergola on the top of the hill was set aside as a women-only listening area for volunteers. A whiteboard read in looping script, "Ladies, please be considerate and enjoy this space quietly. We want to minimize distractions so our men can listen." You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Buttigieg says swatting led to separation from children, by Emily Davies. Former Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg said on Friday that he and his husband had been separated from their 4-year-old twins after an anonymous report falsely accused Mr. Buttigieg of posing a threat to their children. The separation lasted for 24 hours and required their children to sit for interviews with Child Protective Services, Mr. Buttigieg said. The Michigan State Police and CPS determined the report was false, a spokeswoman for the state police said in a statement, adding that false reports are dangerous. "I've been through political attacks in office, death threats in public life, and rocket attacks in war," Mr. Buttigieg, a military veteran, wrote in a Substack post titled, "A Terrible Thing Happened to My Family. But this is the ugliest thing that has happened to me since my career in service began." Mr. Buttigieg noted that the incident occurred soon after the Buttigiegs shared images of their family for Father's Day and also during Pride Month. Mr. Buttigieg, a Democrat, ran for president in 2020, was the first openly gay cabinet secretary, and is widely seen as a 2028 presidential contender. He has long weathered attacks over his sexual orientation. Incidents known as swatting, or false emergency calls intended to draw a heavy police presence, have been on the rise as the political landscape has become increasingly volatile and polarized. While the attacks typically involve dispatching the police to private homes under false pretenses, the targeting of Mr. Buttigieg's family with false claims related to child abuse appeared to introduce a new dimension to the harassment. Mr. Buttigieg said he learned of the allegation last week when a police officer and a Child Protective Services worker showed up to the family's house in Michigan. That night, the twins slept at their grandparents' house. The authorities required them to sit alone for the interviews with the CPS workers, as is common during such investigations. Mr. Buttigieg said that the next day, when he spoke to a police officer at his house, he learned more about the complaint. An anonymous caller had contacted CPS, Mr. Buttigieg said. The caller said that he had spoken to a woman who claimed to have met me at a conference several years ago in Alabama, where she said I told her that I had committed unspeakable violent crimes, and the caller believed my children were still at risk. Mr. Buttigieg said he had told the officer that he had not been to the town where the woman had supposedly met him. The officer made clear that he believed this was politically motivated and said it would not be referred to a prosecutor, Mr. Buttigieg said. The Michigan State Police did not respond to inquiries seeking a report of the incident, audio recordings of the anonymous allegation, or more information about the status of any investigation into the caller. The former Transportation Secretary vowed to try to press charges against the caller. "I don't know how much we can do about it, but so help me God. If there is any way to press civil or criminal charges over this, we will," he wrote on Substack. "Not just for our own sakes, but to draw a line that I thought everyone already recognized. Do not mess with someone's kids." Exonerated New Yorkers say the compensation process is traumatic, by Willow Higgins and Harubi Miko. James Irons sat in the second row of a courtroom in Lower Manhattan in November, sobbing and shaking. He pressed his hands firmly against his ears, an orange towel draped over his head. His fiancée wrapped her arm around his shoulders as his lawyer described a night in Brooklyn in 1995 when Mr. Irons was 18. Detectives, the lawyer said, held Mr. Irons overnight in a police interrogation room, struck him over the head with their hands, and showed him a gun as they repeatedly fed him false statements to say. Mr. Irons, who has cognitive impairment, his lawyer said, confessed to the crime and was later convicted in the murder of a subway booth attendant. Mr. Irons, now 49, had his conviction cleared by a judge in 2022 after spending most of his life behind bars. But last year, he found himself back in a courtroom. His lawyers were arguing his innocence in an effort to win a lawsuit against the state of New York for his wrongful conviction. People who believe they were deprived of their constitutional rights, such as through wrongful convictions, can sue state or local government officials under federal civil rights law. In New York, they can sue the state government in the Court of Claims, which requires a burden of proof closer to beyond a reasonable doubt than federal law calls for. Lawyers for exonerated people say the city has a fairly straightforward process to reach settlements, often going through mediation with a judge. However, those who have had their convictions overturned say the state process can be harrowing and torturous. Someone can be exonerated, meaning cleared of wrongdoing, based on new evidence like DNA. Others can have their conviction reversed because of prosecutorial misconduct or other reasons, and be given a new trial or have their charges dismissed. Although nearly half of the claims against New York since 2016 are settled before a full trial, according to data from the Office of Court Administration, the state sometimes makes claimants sit through deep depositions and forces them back into a courtroom to defend themselves, said Samuel Hershey, a bankruptcy litigator with the White & Case law firm who takes on exoneration cases pro bono. State Senator Zelenor Meary said the legislature should strongly consider changing the laws about exoneration compensation. The same resources that we invest in putting people away and keeping them incarcerated for, in some instances, decades, should be at the same level of resources that we avail to those who are innocent, Mr. Meary said. The state is represented by the Office of the Attorney General, Letitia James, who has been vocal about wrongful convictions, which have disproportionately affected Black and Hispanic men. However, some lawyers have said that her office's treatment of such cases is at odds with Ms. James' stated values. In response to questions about the state claims process, Alexis Richards, a spokeswoman for Ms. James, said in a statement, "The Office of the Attorney General has a legal responsibility to represent the state, and we work hard to fulfill that obligation while also supporting wrongfully incarcerated individuals in their pursuit of justice. Every person is entitled to fair treatment under the law, and our office will continue to ensure they receive it." Since 1989, there have been 376 exonerations across New York State, according to the National Registry of Exonerations. Only 2 other states, Illinois and Texas, have overturned more convictions, according to the registry. New York has paid $397 million to exonerated people, more than any other state. In both federal and state courts, settlement amounts are negotiated on a case-by-case basis, while considering factors like time spent in prison, estimated earnings lost, and psychological harm. Mr. Irons had already received more than $18 million in settlement with New York City. In Lower Manhattan, he was trying to see what he could get from the state. Some lawyers have said that New York prolongs the process to wait until there is a city payout to offset what it pays in a settlement. For Sean Williams, 51, receiving money through city and state settlements would have been a financial lifeline. He was 19 years old in 1993 when he was accused of killing his childhood friend in Brooklyn. Mr. Williams was convicted and spent his adulthood behind bars before he was released in 2018. He is one of the many exonerated people who are thrust back into society with no money or job after decades in prison. As many others often do, Mr. Williams ended up taking a high-interest cash advance while awaiting potential settlements for his wrongful conviction. He figured he had a pretty good shot at a payout. Like Mr. Irons, his conviction was overturned after investigations into cases linked to the former detective Louis N. Scarcella, who has been accused of misconduct in several homicide investigations in the 1980s and 1990s. Cases handled by Mr. Scarcella have cost the city and state at least $110 million. New York City settled Mr. Williams' claim for $10.5 million in 2022. The state, on the other hand, worked to discredit it in a trial decided by a judge. I just had to relive that trial all over again, Mr. Williams said in an interview earlier this year. That's what it felt like. The state called witnesses, and in 2020, Mr. Williams took the stand and answered questions stemming from his arrest in 1993. A lawyer for the Attorney General's office asked him where he was at the time of his friend's killing, he recalled. When he asked me about my friend, the last time I seen him, I broke down and cried in the courtroom, Mr. Williams said. The judge, Jeanette Rodriguez-Morick, determined that Mr. Williams had not proved his case and dismissed his claim. Mr. Williams is appealing the decision, and after another ruling against him at the start of June, his suit against the state has entered its 8th year. I had the same feeling I had at trial, Mr. Williams said in June. The system failed me again. In the case of Eric DeBerry, 50, his lawyers thought they had a compelling argument to avoid a trial in his state lawsuit. He had been convicted of first-degree assault and robbery in a 1999 shooting, putting him behind bars for 20 years before he was exonerated. Mr. DeBerry was found actually innocent, an unusual legal outcome in which the judge finds that someone did not commit a crime. However, the Attorney General's office decided that Mr. DeBerry had to prove his innocence again, and a Court of Claims judge agreed. Mr. DeBerry has appealed the decision. In 2024, as the state case wound its way through the court, Mr. DeBerry received a $9.45 million settlement as part of the civil rights lawsuit against the city. I'm out of prison, but I'm still attached to this case, Mr. DeBerry said. As bad as I want to leave this in the past, it's like another form of torture. As for Mr. Irons, his lawyer, David Shanies, has been pleading for a settlement from the state since the beginning of the case, eventually writing a letter addressed to Ms. James, the Attorney General. You have built a reputation on doing what is right, not merely what is expedient, Mr. Shanies said. A settlement, he argued, would spare an already vulnerable man from needless suffering, and it would stand as a clear statement that your office remains firmly dedicated to the cause of justice. But Ms. James did not respond, he said. So Mr. Irons moved forward with the trial, dreading the experience, but believing it was what his mother, who died while he was in prison, would have wanted, he said. Mr. Irons was pushed past an emotional breaking point in court in November, according to his lawyer. Halfway through the trial, his lawyer said the state offered a settlement of $1.5 million. He accepted. I don't want to understate it, Mr. Shanies said. What he went through there caused significant psychological damage, and it was just so unnecessary. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the June 28th issue of the front section of the New York Times. We read from the front section of the New York Times every Sunday at 1 p.m. Your reader has been Kathy. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have a reading of the New York Times opinion page. Following that at 3 o'clock, the New York Times Arts and Leisure, and at 4 o'clock, a rebroadcast of this morning's Buffalo News. Radio Reading mails out a large print program schedule to our listeners every other month. If you have not received a Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service large print program schedule in the mail, please call us at 716-821-5555. We will make sure that you receive one every other month. A Braille version of the schedule is also available upon request. Our number again is 716-821-5555. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability